The conference room air conditioner wheezed like it was dying, which seemed appropriate given what was about to happen to my career. I counted the water rings on the mahogany table, 17 overlapping circles from coffee cups that nobody ever bothered to use coasters for, despite the passive-aggressive reminders from facilities. The newest ring was still wet, bleeding into the wood grain, as Marcus Chen, our new chief operating officer, flipped through my termination paperwork with the casual efficiency of someone ordering lunch. "This isn't personal, Jordan," he said, not looking up. The fluorescent lights caught the gel in his hair, making it gleam like black ice. "We're restructuring for efficiency. Your position has become redundant." Redundant. After 7 years of keeping this place from imploding every time someone in the C-suite had a vision. I pressed my thumbnail into my palm, a habit from childhood that kept me centered when the world tilted. Which position would that be exactly? The one where I saved us $3 million in vendor contracts last quarter, or the one where I caught the HVAC fraud before it hit the audit? He finally looked up, and there was something in his smile that made my skin prickle. "The one where you ask too many questions." He slid the papers across the table. The top sheet had yellow sticky tabs marking where I should sign. They'd even predated it. "Security will escort you out in 20 minutes. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." The thing about being invisible for 7 years is that people forget you're watching. They forget you have access to systems, to patterns, to the small inconsistencies that add up to something bigger. As I stared at those papers, I thought about Diane from accounting, whose chemotherapy schedule I'd helped her hide from management by adjusting her flex time reports. I thought about the maintenance crew who'd shown me every hidden corner of this building during my late-night process audits. I thought about the folder on my desktop labeled irregularities that I'd been updating for the past 3 months, ever since Marcus arrived with his efficiency gospel and his tendency to make problems disappear. "I'll need to review this with legal," I said, keeping my voice steady. "No need. It's all standard." He was already checking his phone, dismissing me before I'd even left the room. "Beth from HR will handle your exit interview." Beth wouldn't handle anything. Beth had been let go 2 weeks ago, another efficiency cut. Her replacement was Marcus's college roommate, a guy named Trevor who spent most of his time at the golf simulator on the 3rd floor. But I didn't mention that. Instead, I pulled the papers toward me, letting my fingers trace the edges while I memorized the clause numbers he'd highlighted. Contract manipulation was usually harder to spot, but Marcus had gotten sloppy. Or maybe he just thought I was too stupid to notice. "Can I at least clean out my desk?" I asked. "Security will bring you a box. Company policy." He stood straightening his tie. It was her mess, probably cost more than most people here made in a week. "I have a board call in 5. Are we done?" We weren't close to done, but he didn't need to know that yet. "Just one question," I said, standing slowly. "Does the board know about the Kellerman account?" For the first time since I'd walked in, I saw something flicker across his face. Just a microsecond of uncertainty before the corporate mask snapped back into place. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. Just curious if they know." I gathered my bag, careful to keep my movements casual. "I worked on that account for 3 years. Noticed some interesting patterns in the billing lately." "Your access was revoked as of this morning," he said, but there was a tightness in his voice now. Of course it was. I headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, Marcus, you might want to check with facilities about the conference room AC. It's been making that sound for 2 weeks. Jimmy put in a work order, but someone keeps canceling it from the system." I left before he could respond, walking through the cubicle maze I'd navigated in the dark during countless late nights. People kept their heads down as I passed, probably already informed via email blast that I was persona non grata. That was fine. The ones who mattered would find me later. They always did. Security was waiting at my desk. Rico and Paul, guys I'd shared baseball scores with for years. Rico's jaw was clenched as he handed me a cardboard box. 10 minutes, Jordan. I'm sorry. Not your fault. I started pulling personal items from my drawers, making sure to leave the company laptop prominently displayed. What I didn't mention was that everything important had been backed up to my personal cloud weeks ago when I'd first sensed the wind changing. Every email, every modified contract, every mysteriously altered vendor payment. Hey Rico, how's Maria doing? The baby coming soon? Next month. His face softened slightly. She's nervous, first kid and all. Tell her about the lactation consultant at Jefferson Memorial. Insurance covers it if you code it right. I'll email you the details. I placed a framed photo of my late father in the box, his Air Force uniform pristine, even in the faded photograph. Actually, better yet, have her call me. I'll walk her through the whole process. Paul shifted uncomfortably. We're supposed to revoke all your contacts. Since when has Marcus cared about maternity benefits? I asked, keeping my tone light. Both guards exchanged glances. They knew exactly what was happening here. Everyone below the executive floor did. As I packed, I let my mind catalog everything I'd need. The authentication codes I'd memorized, the backup drives hidden in my apartment, the contact information for every vendor Marcus had mysteriously switched in the past quarter. The email threads where he'd pressured department heads to sign off on purchases without proper review. The late-night keycard logs showing him in the building during times that didn't match his official reports. That's time, Paul said apologetically. I sealed the box surprisingly light for 7 years of work. As we walked toward the elevator, I passed Diane's cubicle. She was at her computer, but I saw her hand move slightly, a small wave, hidden from the security cameras. Through her screen's reflection, I could see she had her personal email open. Good. She'd gotten my message. The elevator ride was silent, except for the mechanical hum of descent. 12 floors of corporate aspiration, and I was being expelled like a contamination. But contamination was exactly right, just not in the way Marcus thought. Some things, once they get into a system, are impossible to remove completely. They leave traces, markers, evidence of their existence that smart people can follow back to the source. Rico walked me all the way to my car, a 10-year-old Honda that looked embarrassingly practical next to the Teslas and BMWs in the executive section. Jordan, he said, quietly glancing around, that thing about the Kellerman account, is it real? Everything's real if you know where to look. I placed the box in my trunk next to the gym bag I never used. Take care of yourself, Rico, and keep an eye on Maria. Pregnancy can make people vulnerable to policy changes. He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in the 5th-floor window watching my departure. He probably thought he'd won, eliminated a threat, streamlined an inefficiency. But the thing about efficiency is that it's only as good as the system it serves. And Marcus had just revealed exactly what kind of system he was building. My phone buzzed at the first red light. Diane, check your personal email. Also, Trevor just sent out a memo about new healthcare enrollment deadlines. Moved them up by 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That would catch half the staff off guard, especially the ones with ongoing treatments. I pulled into a Starbucks parking lot and opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The healthcare thing wasn't just cruel, it was strategic. Miss the enrollment window, and you're stuck with whatever basic plan they default you to. For someone like Diane, that could mean the difference between covered chemotherapy and bankruptcy. I started a new document, labeling it simply Timeline. Then I began typing everything I remembered from the past 3 months, every small moment that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now formed a clear pattern. Marcus arriving with his efficiency mandate, the sudden vendor switches, the policy rewrites that always seemed to benefit the same small group of suppliers, the departure of anyone who asked questions. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code internal company line. Jordan, the voice was whispered urgent. It's Amy from procurement. Amy had started 2 months ago, fresh from business school, still naive enough to believe in corporate mission statements. You shouldn't be calling me. I know, but something's wrong, really wrong. Mr. Chen just asked me to approve a payment to a vendor I've never heard of. $500,000 in the invoice. It doesn't look right. Did you approve it? Not yet. He said it was urgent that the board already signed off, but… She paused, and I could hear typing. Jordan, the company, isn't even registered properly. I looked it up. It was created 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, right after he'd started his efficiency cuts. Amy listened carefully. Document everything. Screenshot the invoice, the emails, the company registration. Send it all to your personal email right now. I could lose my job. You could lose more than that if this goes south. Trust me. I thought about my father, who'd taught me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. And Amy, check who the registered owner of that company is. I'm betting it's not Marcus Chen's name, but someone close to him. She gasped softly. How did you know? Because he's smart enough not to put his name on it, but not smart enough to avoid patterns. I started my car. Send me everything. And Amy, start looking for another job. This is going to get worse before it gets better. After she hung up, I sat in the parking lot watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the asphalt. Marcus had made 2 mistakes. The first was thinking I'd go quietly. The second was not realizing how many others he'd hurt along the way. Every efficiency cut had a human cost, and those humans had friends, allies, people who cared about them, people who were tired of watching good employees get sacrificed for someone's quarterly bonus. I drove home to my apartment, a modest 1-bedroom, in a building that still had radiator heat and windows that painted themselves shut every summer. The locks stuck, like always requiring the specific jiggle-lift-push combination I'd perfected over 4 years. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning, except now it felt different. Transitional, like the space between one life and another. I made coffee, proper coffee, not the break room swill I'd been drinking for 7 years, and opened my laptop. Amy's files were already in my inbox, along with messages from 3 other employees I hadn't expected to hear from. Word traveled fast in cubicle land, especially word about someone standing up to management. The first message was from Jimmy, in facilities, the one who'd been trying to fix the conference room AC. Jordan, you were right about those work orders being cancelled. But here's the interesting part. They weren't just cancelled. They were redirected to a different vendor, one charging 3 times the normal rate. I've attached the logs. The second was from someone in IT I'd only spoken to once. Heard you're out. Before you left, did you notice anything weird about the server access logs? Someone's been downloading employee records at weird hours. Not my business, but thought you should know. The third made me stop mid-sip. It was from Beth, the former HR director. I've been documenting everything since my termination. Wrongful dismissal is just the beginning. Call me. I called her immediately. Beth answered on the first ring, and I could hear restaurant noise in the background. Jordan, thank God. I was hoping you'd reach out. Her voice was lower than I remembered, careful. Can you meet not somewhere public? This is bigger than just Marcus. How much bigger? Remember the board call he mentioned? Half of them don't know what he's doing. The other half, she paused. They're getting kickbacks from every vendor he switches. I have proof, but I need someone who understands the operational side to make sense of it all. We agreed to meet at her house that evening. As I hung up, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally seeing the full picture. This wasn't just about efficiency cuts or even garden variety embezzlement. This was systematic corporate fraud, the kind that destroyed companies and left employees without pensions, healthcare futures. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing everything into a coherent narrative. Financial records showing the shell companies, email threads revealing the pressure tactics, the pattern of terminations that conveniently removed anyone who might ask questions. By the time I left for Beth's house, I had 40 pages of documentation and a growing understanding that taking down Marcus would require more than just evidence. It would require strategy allies and perfect timing. Beth lived in one of those suburban developments where all the houses looked alike except for the color of the front door. Hers was red, which seemed appropriate given what we were about to discuss. She answered before I could knock, pulling me inside quickly. "Were you followed?" she asked. "I don't think so." Though honestly, I hadn't been checking. Paranoia wasn't my default setting, but maybe it should have been. Her living room was a war room. Papers covered every surface, the coffee table, the couch, even parts of the floor. Red yarn connected photos on the wall like something out of a conspiracy thriller, except this conspiracy was real and documented in duplicate. Jesus, Beth, I've had 2 weeks and a lot of anger. She handed me a glass of wine without asking if I wanted one. Look at this. She walked me through it methodically. Marcus's arrival 3 months ago hadn't been random. He'd been brought in by 2 board members, Patricia Kellerman and David Voss, who had their own financial troubles. Marcus's efficiency cuts weren't just cover for embezzlement. They were funding a larger scheme to artificially inflate the company's value before a planned acquisition. "They're going to sell," Beth said, pointing to a printed email. "In 6 months, they're selling to Apex Corp. But first, they need to show massive profit improvements. Every cut, every redirected contract, it all goes toward making the books look better. And the employees, casualties of war." She refilled her wine glass, her hand steady despite the fury in her voice. "Diane's chemotherapy. Not their problem. The maintenance crew's pension contributions, a liability to be eliminated. Your 7 years of institutional knowledge. Worthless if it can't be monetized this quarter." I studied the wall of connections, seeing patterns within patterns. "We can't just expose the fraud. They'll claim it was a few bad actors, fire Marcus, maybe Kellerman and Voss. If we're lucky, the company still gets sold, employees still get screwed. So what do we do?" I thought about my father again, about the stories he'd told of strategic planning in the Air Force. How the best operations were the ones where the enemy defeated themselves. We let them hang themselves. But first, we need more people. This can't just be 2 disgruntled ex-employees with a grudge. Beth smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Already ahead of you. There's a group of us. We've been meeting at the community center, calling ourselves a job search support group. But really, we're all Marcus's casualties. How many? 12 so far. More joining every week as he keeps cutting." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of the isolation I'd carried since that morning. "We need someone still inside. Someone with access." "Diane," we both said simultaneously. Beth nodded. "She's been feeding me information, but carefully. If Marcus suspects, he'll find a way to cut her insurance before the new enrollment deadline." I pulled out my phone. "We need to move fast, but smart. Like a surgical strike, not a sledgehammer." Over the next 2 hours, we developed our plan. It was ambitious, maybe impossibly so, but it had one advantage: Marcus's arrogance. He believed he was untouchable, that his Ivy League MBA and board connections made him invulnerable to the concerns of ordinary employees. That blindness would be his downfall. I texted Diane from a burner phone Beth had somehow acquired. "Game on. Check your personal email for instructions." The response came quickly. "Understood. Also, Marcus just scheduled an all-hands meeting for Friday, announcing more efficiency improvements. Friday? 3 days to pull together enough evidence to stop him. 3 days to coordinate with a dozen angry ex-employees and whatever allies we still had inside. 3 days to prevent the sale that would destroy hundreds of lives for the sake of a stock bump. We should record everything," Beth said, already pulling out a small digital recorder. "Every conversation, every meeting. Build an archive they can't deny. Chain of custody." I agreed. Everything time-stamped, witnessed, backed up in multiple locations. We worked until midnight, fueled by righteous anger and Beth's surprisingly good coffee. By the time I left, we had assignments for everyone in our group, a communication protocol that avoided company surveillance, and a growing understanding that this was bigger than just revenge. This was about justice, about protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. The drive home was surreal, streetlights creating pools of amber in the darkness. I thought about Marcus in his high-rise apartment, probably sleeping soundly on thread counts I couldn't afford, never imagining that the people he'd discarded were organizing against him. My phone buzzed as I parked. "Amy, from procurement. You were right about the shell company. The registered owner is Trevor Williams, the new HR guy. But get this, the bank account traces back to an LLC, partially owned by Patricia Kellerman's son. The connections were becoming clearer, the web more defined. I screenshotted everything and added it to our growing database. Tomorrow I'd meet with the others, start building our case properly. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Marcus had thought he was playing chess while we were playing checkers. He hadn't realized we weren't playing at all. We were documenting his every move, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the board. My apartment felt less transitional when I returned. It felt like a command center, a place where something important was beginning. I made more coffee, despite the hour, and opened a new document. This one I titled The Reckoning, because that's what this was going to be. Not just exposure, but a complete dismantling of the system Marcus had built. Every fraudulent invoice, every redirected contract, every terminated employee would have their story told. The board would have no choice but to listen, especially when we presented it in the most public forum possible, the quarterly shareholders meeting in 3 weeks. I smiled, thinking about Marcus's face when he realized his efficiency gospel had created its own opposition. Every person he'd cut had become a witness. Every corner he'd shaved had left evidence. Every lie he'd told had created a trail leading back to him. The community center, where Beth's group met, was in a strip mall between a defunct Radio Shack and a thriving Thai restaurant. The contrast seemed appropriate somehow. Death and life side by side, the past and the future, separated by a thin wall. I arrived early Wednesday evening, wanting to scope out the space before meeting the others. The room was clearly meant for happier gatherings. Motivational posters about teamwork covered water-stained walls, and the fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that made everyone look slightly ill. But there was something powerful about the shabbiness, something honest. This wasn't a corporate conference room where lies came wrapped in professional presentations. This was a place for truth, however uncomfortable. People arrived in ones and twos, each carrying the particular exhaustion of the recently unemployed. I recognized some faces: Sandra from marketing, Kevin from legal, Tom from warehouse operations. Others were strangers, but we all shared the same look, determined beneath the fatigue, angry beneath the politeness. Beth called the meeting to order by tapping a coffee mug against the table. "Everyone, this is Jordan. Some of you know them already. You're the one who mentioned Kellerman to Marcus," Tom said. It wasn't a question. "Rico told me," said Marcus, went pale as a ghost. "Just planting seeds," I replied, taking a seat in the circle of mismatched chairs. "But we need more than seeds. We need a forest." Sandra leaned forward. "I've been tracking the marketing contracts Marcus redirected. 3 of them went to the same agency, one that didn't exist 6 months ago." "Let me guess," I said. "Another shell company?" "Better. It's registered to Marcus's ex-girlfriend. They broke up last year, but apparently not enough to stop doing business together." Kevin pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "From a legal perspective, this is conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of fiduciary duty, probably RICO if we can prove the pattern. But we need more than paper trails. We need witnesses willing to testify." "That's the problem," Beth said. "Everyone still employed is terrified. Marcus has made it clear that anyone who speaks up gets terminated with prejudice. No references, no unemployment, no health care continuation." "What about the board members who aren't in on it?" I asked. "There must be some who actually care about the company." Tom laughed bitterly. "You mean the ones who show up twice a year for free dinners and rubber stamp whatever's put in front of them?" "Actually," a quiet voice said from the doorway, "there might be one." We all turned. A woman I didn't recognize stood there, professionally dressed despite the casual setting. She was older, maybe early 60s, with the kind of posture that suggested decades of boardrooms and difficult decisions. "I'm Helen Morrison," she said, entering the room. "I'm on the board, and I'm very interested in what you have to say." The room went silent. Beth stood slowly. "How did you find us?" "My assistant's daughter works in IT. She mentioned some unusual server activity, employees being terminated without proper documentation. I started investigating quietly." Helen took an empty chair, her movements deliberate. "I've been on that board for 15 years. I've watched this company grow from a startup to what it is today. I won't watch Marcus Chen destroy it for a quick profit." "With respect," Kevin said carefully, "where were you when the terminations started?" Helen's face tightened. "Being fed false information. Every board packet showed improving metrics, reduced costs, increased efficiency. Marcus is very good at presenting data that tells the story he wants told. It wasn't until I started talking to actual employees that I realized the human cost." "And the other board members?" I asked. "Kellerman and Voss are definitely involved. The others, negligent at best, complicit at worst. They see the numbers improving and don't ask hard questions." She pulled out an iPad. "But I've been asking questions, and I think you'll find my findings interesting." She showed us emails between Marcus and various board members, messages that painted a picture of willful blindness, at best active conspiracy, at worst. The acquisition by Apex Corp wasn't just planned, it was already in negotiations, with Marcus set to receive a $10 million retention bonus if the sale went through. $10 million, Sandra whispered, "for destroying people's lives. Plus stock options in the new company," Helen added. "Kellerman and Voss have similar deals. They're essentially looting the company before selling the empty shell." I studied Helen, trying to gauge her motives. "Why help us? You could take this to the authorities yourself, because authorities move slowly, and by the time they act, the sale will be complete and the damage done." She met my gaze steadily. "And because I believe the employees deserve to be heard. You've been the backbone of this company. You deserve to have your say in its future. Beth and I exchanged glances. Having a board member on our side changed everything, but it also added risk. If Helen was playing us feeding information back to Marcus, we need guarantees, Kevin said, voicing what we were all thinking. Legal protection for whistleblowers' assurance that our evidence will be heard. Helen nodded. I can call a special board meeting, but I need cause. Serious allegations with supporting documentation. And it needs to be public enough that they can't bury it. The quarterly shareholders meeting, I said, 2 weeks from Friday. Marcus is supposed to present the efficiency improvements. What if we present something else? A smile played at the corners of Helen's mouth. That would require shareholder standing. Someone would need to own stock to bring a motion. Every employee who's been here more than 2 years has stock options, Tom pointed out. Most of us never exercised them because we couldn't afford the tax hit. But together, I said, understanding dawning, we might have enough shares to force a vote. The room erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once. Ideas flew back and forth, who still had options, how to exercise them quickly, what percentage we'd need for standing. It was chaos, but productive chaos, the kind that happens when people realize they're not powerless after all. Helen raised her hand for quiet. I can help with the legal framework, but you'll need to move fast, and you'll need someone still inside the company to help coordinate. We have people, Beth said carefully, not naming names even here. But Marcus is getting paranoid. He's installed new monitoring software on all company computers. Then don't use company computers, Helen said simply. Use personal devices, meet in person, communicate through channels he can't monitor. He's arrogant enough to believe electronic surveillance is enough. We spent the next 3 hours developing our strategy. Helen would work the board angle carefully, feeling out who might be convinced to listen. Kevin would handle the legal framework, making sure everything we did was bulletproof. The rest of us would gather evidence, coordinate with inside allies, and prepare for the shareholders' meeting. As the meeting broke up, Helen pulled me aside. You're the one who noticed the Kellerman connection first, aren't you? I nodded. Marcus underestimated you. That's his weakness. He sees people as functions, not as individuals. He never imagines that the operations analyst he fired might be the one to bring him down. It's not about bringing him down, I said. It's about protecting the people he's hurting. Helen studied me for a moment. That's why you'll win. Because for you, it's not personal. It's principle. But she was wrong. It was both. The next few days blurred together in a haze of coffee, encrypted messages, and clandestine meetings. Amy from procurement had become our inside eye, documenting every suspicious transaction. She'd discovered that the shell companies weren't just receiving payments, they were billing for services, never rendered products, never delivered. It's phantom invoicing, she explained over a secure call. Marcus approves payments for consulting services, maintenance work, software licenses, but nothing actually happens. The money just disappears into these companies. How much total? Over the past 3 months, almost $8 million. $8 million. Enough to fund hundreds of employees' salaries, to maintain healthcare benefits, to honor pension commitments. Instead, it was lining the pockets of Marcus and his conspirators. Diane, meanwhile, was documenting the human cost. She'd created a spreadsheet of every employee terminated or forced out, including their years of service, their final salaries, and most importantly, their personal situations. Single mothers losing health insurance, veterans denied their earned benefits, long-term employees pushed out just before pension vesting. There's something else, she told me during a careful conversation at a coffee shop far from the office. Marcus has been accessing personnel files he shouldn't have permission to see, medical records specifically. That's illegal. Very. And guess whose records he's been reviewing? Everyone with chronic conditions or ongoing treatments. He's targeting the expensive employees. I thought of Diane's chemotherapy, of the others who depended on company insurance for life-saving treatments. He's culling the herd, like we're livestock. Her voice was bitter. Inefficient livestock. The pattern was becoming clearer. Marcus wasn't just embezzling, he was systematically eliminating anyone who might cost the company money in benefits, anyone who might object to his methods, anyone who might notice what he was doing. It was corporate eugenics dressed up as efficiency. Friday arrived with unusual April heat, the kind that makes concrete shimmer and tempers short. Marcus's all-hands meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., but I had my own appointment that morning. Helen had arranged for me to meet with someone she described only as useful. The address led me to a law firm downtown, all glass and steel and aggressive air conditioning. The receptionist directed me to a conference room where a man in his 40s waited surrounded by bankers' boxes. "Jordan, I'm Bill Patterson. I used to be Apex Corp's general counsel." Emphasis on used to. "You left Apex?" "Forced out, actually. When I objected to some of their acquisition practices." He gestured to the boxes. "I kept copies of everything, probably more than I should have. When Helen told me what was happening at your company, I thought you should see this." He pulled out a thick folder. "Apex has a pattern. They identify struggling companies, install someone like Marcus to gut it from the inside, then acquire the remains for pennies on the dollar. Your company is the 7th they've targeted this way. You're saying Marcus has done this before. Different names, same playbook. Cut costs, redirect funds, eliminate dissent, sell cheap." He showed me newspaper clippings, SEC filings, employee testimonials from other companies. The only difference this time is that someone's fighting back. "What happened to the others? The employees?" Bill's face darkened. "Mass layoffs within 6 months of acquisition. Pension funds raided, healthcare eliminated. Apex strips the assets and leaves nothing but a corporate corpse." I felt the weight of what we were really fighting against. This wasn't just about Marcus or even our company. This was about a system designed to devour the livelihoods of working people for the benefit of a few. "Will you testify?" I asked. "At the shareholders' meeting?" Helen already asked. "I'll be there." He pushed the boxes toward me. "Take these. Everything's copied, documented, legally obtained. It should help build your case." I spent the rest of the morning going through Bill's materials, each document adding another layer to the pattern of corporate predation. By the time Marcus's all-hands meeting approached, I had enough evidence to bury him 10 times over. But evidence was only useful if people were willing to see it. Amy texted me updates from the meeting. Marcus announced another round of optimizations, 20 more positions, eliminated 3 departments, consolidated healthcare contributions, increased by 40%. But the real blow came at the end. "He's moving up the acquisition timeline," Amy wrote. "Shareholders meeting rescheduled for next Friday. 1 week. 1 week. Helen had warned us Marcus might try something like this if he sensed threats. We'd planned for 2 weeks, and now we had 7 days. I called an emergency meeting at the community center. Everyone who could make it came. Even some people I hadn't seen before, employees who'd heard whispers of resistance and wanted to help. The Thai restaurant owner, seeing our growing numbers, sent over free food without being asked. Small kindnesses in dark times. "We need to accelerate everything," I told the group. "Helen, can you get us on the agenda for Friday?" "Already done." I called it a matter of fiduciary emergency. The board can't refuse to hear it. Kevin had been working with a securities lawyer. "We need at least 5% of shares to force a vote. How many options do we have between us?" People started calculating, pulling out old employment contracts, checking vesting schedules. The math was close, too close. We needed more shareholders on our side. What about the institutional investors? Sandra suggested. The pension funds and mutual funds that own large blocks, they only care about returns, Tom said dismissively. No, Helen corrected. They care about liability. If they knowingly allow fraud to continue, they can be sued by their own investors. That changed things. We divided into teams: one to contact institutional investors, one to finalize documentation, one to coordinate with remaining employees, and one to prepare the presentation that would expose everything. I'll handle Marcus, I said. Everyone looked at me. He needs to be distracted to think he's won. If he suspects what we're planning, he'll find a way to stop it. That's dangerous, Beth warned. If he thinks you're a threat, then I'll make him think I'm not. I sent Marcus an email that night from my personal account. Simple defeated, you win. I just need a reference for my next job. Can we talk? His response came within an hour. Of course it did. Predators always enjoy the surrender of their prey. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Starbucks on 5th Street. The Starbucks was crowded with Saturday morning coffee seekers, providing good cover for what I knew would be a delicate conversation. Marcus arrived precisely on time. His weekend casual still looking like it cost more than most people's formal wear. He ordered a venti something with too many modifiers, while I stuck with black coffee. The differences between us in a nutshell. Jordan, he said, sitting across from me with the satisfied air of a conqueror, granting audience to the conquered. I'm glad you reached out. I never wanted things to be adversarial between us. The lie came so smoothly, I almost admired it. I need this job, Marcus. The reference, 7 years, looks better than being unemployed. Of course, I understand completely. He pulled out his phone, probably recording. I'm happy to provide a reference stating you were laid off due to restructuring. Nothing negative. That's generous, I said, letting exhaustion color my voice. It wasn't hard, I was exhausted, just not defeated. Can I ask you something off the record? His eyes sharpened, but he nodded. How did you know about the Kellerman account? He relaxed, probably thinking I was fishing for where I'd gone wrong. You were too thorough, Jordan, too detail-oriented. In business, sometimes you need to see the bigger picture, not get lost in the weeds. The bigger picture being the acquisition. His smile widened. See, you did figure it out. Too late, but still. Yes, Apex Corp will give this company the resources it needs to truly compete. Some positions will be eliminated, sure, but that's progress. And your position, Senior Vice President of Operations for the merged entity. He leaned back, satisfied with himself. Sometimes, Jordan, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And the employees are the eggs. Cost centers, he corrected. That's all any of us are really. The smart ones find ways to become profit centers. Like the vendors you've been switching to, they're certainly profitable. Something flickered in his eyes, but he maintained his smile. Competitive bidding, better services. All above board. Of course, I agreed. Though I'm curious about the process. For my next job, you understand. Learning from the best. His ego won over his caution. For the next 20 minutes, he actually explained his system to me, thinking he was educating a defeated opponent. He described how to identify inefficiencies, people with health problems, how to restructure contracts to avoid legal challenges, how to create urgency around acquisitions. He was teaching me how to destroy companies from the inside, and he was proud of it. I recorded everything on my phone, in my pocket, Beth's digital recorder, in my bag, providing backup. Every word was evidence. But more than that, it was confession. The shareholders' meeting should be interesting, I said casually, finishing my coffee. A formality. The board's already aligned the major investors on board. By next Saturday, this will all be history. You're probably right. I stood to leave, then paused. Marcus, the people you're calling cost centers, they have names. Diane has cancer. Tom's son has autism and needs specialized therapy. Sandra's husband is a disabled veteran. They're not inefficiencies, they're human beings. That's exactly the kind of thinking that held you back, he replied, unmoved. Business isn't personal. You made it personal when you went after sick people. His face hardened. Be careful, Jordan. That reference can easily become a blacklist. I'm counting on it, I said, and left before he could respond. The rest of the weekend was a blur of preparation. The institutional investors proved more receptive than expected, especially when presented with evidence of fraud. 3 pension funds and 2 mutual funds agreed to attend the meeting and hear our presentation. Together with employee shares, we had enough standing to force not just a hearing, but a vote. Helen worked her contacts on the board, finding 2 more members willing to listen. They weren't allies exactly, but they were worried enough about personal liability to want the truth exposed. By Monday, word had somehow leaked into the company. Not the specifics, but enough to create a buzz. Employees whispered in hallways, forwarded cryptic emails, made excuses to work late and access files. Marcus must have sensed something because he sent out a company-wide email about maintaining focus during transitions and avoiding speculation and rumor-mongering. Diane called me Monday night. He's getting paranoid, installing cameras in the break rooms monitoring badge access. He fired 2 people today for excessive printer use. Who? Carlos from shipping and May from customer service. Both were asking questions about the vendor changes. 2 more casualties. I added their names to our list, made sure Kevin knew for the legal case. Every termination was more evidence, but also more lives disrupted. Tuesday brought an unexpected ally, Trevor Williams. Marcus's college roommate and HR replacement showed up at my apartment, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I can't do this anymore, he said without preamble. Marcus, what he's doing, I thought it was just business, but what? He's targeting people specifically. Has me pulling medical records, flagging anyone with expensive conditions. It's illegal, it's immoral, it's... He broke off, running his hands through his hair. I have a daughter. She's 8. How do I explain to her that Daddy helps fire sick people? I let him in, made coffee, and listened as he unburdened himself. Trevor had emails, recordings, even videos of Marcus explicitly instructing him to violate employment law. He'd been documenting everything, partly to protect himself, partly because some part of him knew it was wrong. Will you testify? I asked. At the shareholders' meeting, Marcus will destroy me. Marcus is going to destroy you anyway. Once the acquisition goes through, you think he'll keep you around. You know too much. The truth of it hit him visibly. He said I'd be head of HR for the whole region. He says a lot of things. Trevor sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I'll testify, but I want protection. Whistleblower status, the works. Kevin can arrange that. But Trevor, we need everything, every document, every email, every shady instruction. He pulled out a flash drive. Already copied. Everything from the past 3 months. Wednesday felt like the calm before the storm. We met one final time at the community center, now packed with almost 40 people. Former employees, current employees, risking everything, even some family members who'd come to support. The Thai restaurant owner had officially become our unofficial caterer, refusing payment, saying something about karma and community. Helen stood before the group like a general addressing troops. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The board will try to rush through the acquisition vote, but I've ensured we're on the agenda. When I call for new business, that's our moment. Kevin walked through the legal strategy. We present evidence of fraud, demand an independent investigation, and call for a vote of no confidence in current leadership. With the institutional investors, we have enough shares to force the vote. What about Marcus? Someone asked. He won't just sit there. Let me worry about Marcus, I said. He thinks I'm beaten. He'll be focused on me, not the rest of you. Beth coordinated roles. Who would present which evidence? Who would handle questions? Who would work the crowd? We rehearsed key moments, anticipated objections, prepared for every contingency we could imagine. Remember, I told everyone, we're not trying to destroy the company. We're trying to save it. From Marcus, from Apex, from the culture of treating employees as disposable. This is about more than revenge. It's about justice. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through everything that could go wrong. Marcus discovering our plan, the board refusing to hear us, the institutional investors backing out, security removing us from the building. My phone buzzed at 3 a.m. A text from an unknown number. We know what you're planning. Stop now or face consequences. I screenshot it, forwarded it to Kevin for the legal file, then typed back, see you tomorrow. Because that's what predators never understand about prey. Sometimes, when cornered, when pushed too far, when defending something that matters, prey fights back. Friday morning arrived grey and humid, the air thick with the promise of storms, fitting weather for what was about to happen. I dressed carefully, my best suit, the one I'd bought for my father's funeral. It felt like armor, like carrying his integrity with me. The corporate headquarters looked different from the outside when you weren't authorized to enter. The glass reflected the cloudy sky, making the building look like it was dissolving into the atmosphere. Security had my name on a list Helen's doing, and I was directed to the boardroom on the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. Each floor marker was a reminder of the life I'd lived here for 7 years. Third floor, where I'd started as a junior analyst. Fifth floor, where I'd discovered my first major cost-saving initiative. Seventh floor, where Diane had told me about her diagnosis and I'd helped her navigate FMLA paperwork. The boardroom was already half full when I arrived. Marcus stood at the front, setting up his presentation, his confidence radiating like cologne. He saw me, and his smile widened, the condemned prisoner arriving for execution. Jordan, he said loudly enough for others to hear. I didn't expect to see you here. I still have shares, I replied evenly. Thought I should see how my investment plays out. Board members filed in, most looking bored already. Kellerman and Voss sat together, whispering and checking their phones. Helen took her seat at the far end, giving me the slightest nod. Then, our people started arriving. Beth first, then Kevin, then others. Each had been listed as shareholders, each had a right to be here. Marcus's smile faltered slightly as the room filled beyond normal capacity. Quite a turnout. Patricia Kellerman observed, her voice carrying an edge. People care about their investments, Helen said mildly. The institutional investors arrived, last 3 representatives in identical dark suits sitting together like judges. Marcus's face had gone from confident to concerned to carefully blank. The board chair, an elderly man named Richard Graves, who seemed half asleep most of the time, called the meeting to order. We have a full agenda, so let's proceed efficiently. He seemed to relish that last word, unaware of its loaded meaning in this room. Marcus began his presentation. Charts and graphs showing cost reductions, efficiency, improvements, projected synergies with Apex Corp. He was good, I had to admit. Smooth, professional, compelling, if you didn't know what lay beneath the numbers. As you can see, he concluded, the acquisition by Apex represents the best path forward for shareholder value. I call for the vote, Kellerman said quickly. I second, added Voss. Wait, Helen stood. I invoke my right as a board member to introduce new business relevant to this acquisition. Graves frowned. Helen, we've discussed this thoroughly. No, Richard, we've discussed Marcus's version. I think the board and shareholders deserve to hear another perspective. This is highly irregular, Kellerman protested. So is fraud, I said, standing. The room went silent. Marcus's face cycled through emotions, surprise, anger, then forced amusement. I'm not sure what kind of performance this is, he said, but Mr. Taylor is a disgruntled former employee. Who has evidence? Kevin interrupted, standing with a thick folder. Documented verified evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. This is ridiculous, Voss said. Security should remove these people. These people are shareholders, Helen reminded him. They have every right to be heard. One of the institutional investors, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, spoke up. We'd like to hear this evidence. And so we began. Beth presented first, laying out the pattern of terminations. Not just numbers, but names, faces, stories. The screen showed employee photos, people who'd given years to this company, dismissed for manufactured reasons. These aren't efficiency cuts, she said. This is targeted elimination of employees with medical conditions, employees who asked questions, employees who might oppose the acquisition. Trevor testified next, his voice shaking, but determined. He played recordings of Marcus, instructing him to access medical records, to flag expensive employees, to create paper trails for terminations. Marcus's own voice filled the room, cold and calculating. That's taken out of context, Marcus protested. Then provide the context, Helen suggested. Amy presented the financial fraud. Shell companies' phantom invoices redirected funds. She'd created a flowchart showing exactly how money moved from the company to accounts controlled by Marcus Kellerman and Voss. $8 million, she said. That's what's been stolen in just 3 months. These are standard vendor relationships, Marcus argued, but his voice had lost its confidence. With companies that didn't exist 6 months ago, Amy pulled up corporate registrations. Companies registered to your associates, Mr. Chen. Bill Patterson testified about Apex's pattern of acquisitions, showing how 6 other companies had been gutted using the same playbook. This isn't a merger, he said. It's corporate raid disguised as efficiency. The institutional investors were taking notes, whispering among themselves. Other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Kellerman and Voss had stopped protesting, perhaps realizing that denial was making things worse. Then I stood for my part. 3 months ago, Marcus Chen arrived with a mandate to improve efficiency. But efficiency wasn't the goal, it was the cover story. I clicked through slides showing the timeline, the connections, the pattern. Every action taken has been designed to artificially inflate short-term value while destroying long-term viability. Why? Because Marcus Patricia Kellerman and David Voss stand to make millions from the acquisition regardless of what happens to the company afterward. This is slander, Marcus said, standing. I'll sue every one of you. Then you'll have to sue yourself, I said, pulling out my phone, because this is you, in your own words, explaining your system. I played the recording from our Starbucks meeting. Marcus's voice filled the room, casual and confident, describing how to identify cost centers, how to eliminate inefficiencies, how employees were just eggs to be broken for his omelet. The room was dead silent when it finished. Richard Graves, the board chair, seemed fully awake for the first time I'd ever seen. Marcus, is that your voice? It was a private conversation. Is that your voice? Graves repeated. Marcus's jaw clenched. Yes. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Marcus Chen as COO, Helen said. Seconded, said one of the previously silent board members. This is a coup, Kellerman protested. You can't just… Actually, we can, the silver-haired institutional investor said. My fund owns 12% of this company. We've heard enough to demand not just a vote of no confidence, but a full SEC investigation. I represent the California Teachers Pension Fund. Another investor added, we own 8%. We support the motion. The vote was called. One by one, board members cast their votes. Kellerman and Voss voted against, of course. Two others abstained, but the rest, faced with undeniable evidence and the threat of personal liability, voted in favor. The motion passes, Graves announced. Marcus Chen is terminated as COO effective immediately. Furthermore, Helen added, I move to terminate all acquisition discussions with Apex Corp and initiate an independent audit of the past 6 months' financial transactions. That vote wasn't even close. Marcus stood there, his empire crumbling his face, a study in disbelief. You don't understand what you've done. This company needs Apex. Without the acquisition, you'll be bankrupt within a year. Maybe, I said, but we'll face that honestly together as employees and shareholders, not as your victims. Security arrived not for us, but for Marcus. As he was escorted out, he turned back to look at me. This isn't over. Yes, I said, it is. The aftermath was messier than the movies would have you believe. Kellerman and Voss resigned from the board that afternoon, trying to get ahead of the legal consequences. The SEC investigation began the following Monday. Marcus was arrested 2 weeks later on federal fraud charges. But the real work was just beginning. The company was wounded, bleeding money and trust in equal measure. Helen was appointed interim CEO, and her first act was to bring back the terminated employees who wanted to return. Not everyone did. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Diane returned, her position restored with back pay and an apology that could never really be enough. She told me later that the victory felt hollow sometimes, knowing how easily they'd been willing to discard her. But we fought, she said. That matters. Beth was offered the head of HR position, but turned it down, choosing instead to start a consulting firm, helping employees organize against corporate malfeasance. There are more Marcuses out there, she said. Someone needs to stop them. Trevor, despite his complicity, was granted whistleblower protection and testified in the criminal proceedings. He took a massive pay cut to work for a non-profit afterward, saying he needed to balance the scales somehow. Amy was promoted to head of procurement with a mandate to review every vendor relationship Marcus had established. She found another $3 million in recoverable funds money that went back into employee benefits and restoration of cut positions. The institutional investors, having flexed their muscles, demanded board reform. 3 new members were appointed, all with track records of supporting stakeholder capitalism over shareholder supremacy. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I was offered my job back, of course, even offered a promotion to vice president of operations. I turned it down. Why? Helen asked, genuinely puzzled. You earned this. Because the system that created Marcus is still there, I explained. The belief that efficiency matters more than humanity, that people are costs to be minimized rather than assets to be developed. One victory doesn't change that. Instead, I took a position with the State Attorney General's office investigating corporate fraud. Less money, better purpose. My first case was examining Apex Corp's pattern of acquisitions. Bill Patterson became my unofficial advisor. 6 months after the shareholders' meeting, I received a letter from Marcus. He was awaiting trial under house arrest in his expensive apartment that he'd soon lose to asset forfeiture. The letter was brief. You were right about one thing. I underestimated you. But you're wrong if you think this changes anything. There will always be people like me, and companies will always choose efficiency over employees. You won a battle, not the war. He was right, partially. There would always be people like him. But he was wrong about companies always choosing efficiency, because companies don't choose anything, people do. And people can learn, can change, can fight back. I kept the letter as a reminder, not of him, but of what we'd accomplished. 40 people, most of whom had never fought for anything in their lives, had taken on a corrupt executive and won. We'd protected the vulnerable, exposed the truth, and proved that efficiency without humanity is just another word for cruelty. The company survived, though it was tough for a while. Without the artificial inflation, Marcus had created real problems, became visible, but they were faced honestly with input from employees at all levels. Some departments were restructured, but with transparency and genuine need, not as cover for theft. The culture slowly shifted from fear to cautious hope. A year later, at the annual shareholders meeting, Helen presented the financial results. Modest profits, nothing spectacular, but sustainable and honest. We're not the most efficient company, when she admitted to the assembled shareholders, but we're a decent one. We take care of our people, pay our bills, and sleep at night. In today's economy, that might be the most radical thing we can do. The applause was genuine, started by employees in the back and spreading forward. Even some institutional investors joined in, perhaps remembering that their funds existed to provide for teachers and firefighters and other workers who deserved dignity in their own employment. After the meeting, I ran into Rico, the security guard, who'd escorted me out that day that felt like a lifetime ago. His wife, Maria, was with him holding their baby. "Jordan," Maria said, giving me a careful hug around the infant. "Rico told me what you did. Thank you." "I just told the truth," I said. "That's what made it powerful," Rico replied. "I thought about my father then, about his Air Force service, about the honor he'd carried even in difficult times. He would have been proud, I think, not of the revenge, but of the justice, of standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves." The community center, where we'd planned our resistance, had become something else, a support network for employees facing similar situations at other companies. Beth ran workshops there on recognizing corporate fraud. Kevin provided legal clinics. Even the Thai restaurant owner attended, saying he wanted to protect his own employees from exploitation. It was at one of these meetings that I met Sarah, an accountant from another company who was documenting suspicious transactions. She had the same look I'd had a year ago, exhausted but determined, angry but focused. "How did you keep going?" she asked. "When it seemed hopeless." "It was never hopeless," I told her. "Just hard. There's a difference." I helped her build her case, introduced her to Kevin for legal advice, to Beth for strategic planning. 6 months later, her company's CEO was indicted for embezzlement. The cycle continued, but so did the resistance. Marcus was eventually convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. He got 7 years in federal prison, though he'd probably serve 5 with good behavior. Kellerman and Voss received lighter sentences, house arrest, and massive fines that stripped them of their ill-gotten gains. The shell companies were unwound, the stolen money recovered where possible. During the sentencing, Marcus had addressed the court, still trying to frame himself as a visionary, brought down by lesser minds. "I was trying to save the company," he insisted, "to make it competitive in a global economy." The judge, an elderly woman with tired eyes, responded, "Mr. Chen, you mistake extraction for creation, theft for efficiency. You destroyed lives for numbers on a spreadsheet. This court sees no vision in that, only greed." That phrase stuck with me, mistaking extraction for creation. How many companies operated on that principle? How many Marcus Chens were out there protected by the assumption that efficiency justified any cruelty? But for every Marcus, there were hundreds of us, employees who cared about more than stock prices, who saw companies as communities, not just capital, who understood that true efficiency came from respect, not fear. The last time I visited the old office, it was for Diane's retirement party. She'd made it 5 more years cancer, in remission, dignity intact. The break room where we'd once whispered in fear was full of laughter. The conference room where I'd been terminated now had a plaque, Ethical Business Practices Award, from the State Commerce Department. "We did this," Diane said, gesturing at the transformed space. "Not just the investigation, but the after. We made it better." She was right. The revenge had been necessary, but it was the rebuilding that mattered. Creating a workplace where efficiency meant doing things right, not just fast, where people mattered as much as profits, where someone like Marcus couldn't take root because the culture wouldn't support his kind of predation. As I left that night, I passed the spot where I'd been escorted out 3 years earlier. The same tiles, the same walls, but everything had changed. Or maybe we had changed, learned that we didn't have to accept systems that treated us as disposable. My phone buzzed. Another whistleblower, another company, another Marcus to expose. The work never ended, but neither did the hope. Because for every corporate predator, there were dozens of us ready to fight back. We just had to find each other, trust each other, and remember that dignity wasn't inefficient. It was essential. The parking lot was dark. As I walked to my car, still the same practical Honda now, with a few more dents and stories. The executive spaces that had once held Marcus's Tesla and the other luxury cars were filled with a more modest mix. Helen had eliminated executive reserved parking, saying everyone arrived at the same building to do work that mattered. I thought about Marcus's letter, his claim that there would always be people like him. He was probably right, but he'd missed the more important truth: there would always be people like us too. People who counted coffee rings while planning resistance, who documented fraud while undergoing chemotherapy, who chose principle over profit, community over efficiency. The storm that had threatened that morning of the shareholders' meeting had never materialized, the grey clouds dissipating without releasing their burden. But we had been the storm in our quiet way, not a destructive tempest, but a cleansing rain, washing away the toxic culture that had nearly destroyed everything worth saving. As I drove home through familiar streets, I realized the revenge was complete, not because Marcus was in prison or because we'd won, but because we'd transformed the very ground he'd tried to salt. Where he'd planted fear, we'd grown solidarity. Where he'd sown division, we'd cultivated trust. Where he'd preached efficiency, we'd practiced humanity. That was the ultimate revenge, not just stopping him, but proving his entire worldview wrong. Showing that a company could succeed without sacrificing its soul, that efficiency without empathy was just another form of violence, that the people he'd dismissed as cost centers were actually the heart of everything valuable. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. It was Helen. "Jordan, I wanted you to know, the board voted to create an employee advocacy position. Someone whose job is to ensure what happened with Marcus never happens again. It's yours if you want it." I thought about it for a moment, returning to the place where it all started, but in a role designed to prevent future predation. It felt like completing a circle. "Can I work with the AG's office too?" I asked. "Keep investigating other companies." "We'll make it work," Helen said. "The board agrees what you've built, this network of corporate accountability. It's bigger than just us. We want to be part of it." "Then yes," I said, "I'll take it." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, listening to the night sounds of the city. Somewhere out there, another Marcus was probably planning another acquisition, another efficiency drive, another round of human casualties. But somewhere else, Employees were sharing information, documenting irregularities, refusing to accept that their dignity was negotiable. The war Marcus mentioned in his letter would never end, but neither would the resistance. And every small victory, every protected employee, every exposed fraud, every company that chose humanity over pure efficiency, these were battles worth fighting. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the lock still requiring its particular combination of movements. Inside the walls were now covered with thank you letters from employees whose jobs we'd saved, newspaper clippings of successful prosecutions, photos from the community center gatherings, evidence not of revenge, but of resilience. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table, displaying another email from another frightened employee at another company. The subject line read, "I think something's wrong here, and I don't know who else to tell." I smiled, poured a cup of coffee, despite the late hour, and began typing a response. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And remember, you're not alone." Because that was the lesson Marcus never learned, the truth his efficiency metrics couldn't capture. We are more than the sum of our productive output. We are communities' networks of mutual support that grow stronger under pressure. Every attempt to reduce us to numbers only reminds us that we're human. The coffee was strong, probably too strong for midnight, but I had work to do. Another case to build, another group to organize, another predator to expose. The work of justice was never efficient. It was slow, careful, methodical. It required patience and solidarity and the kind of courage that comes from knowing others depend on you. Outside, the city hummed with its usual midnight energy. Somewhere, a night shift was starting. Somewhere, an employee was working late to meet an impossible deadline. Somewhere, a Marcus was scheming. But somewhere, two people like us were watching, documenting, preparing. I opened a new document and began typing Case File 0117, Suspected Wage Theft and Benefits Fraud. Another battle in the endless war, but one worth fighting. Because if we'd learned anything from bringing down Marcus Chen, it was this: they might have the money and the power and the efficiency metrics, but we had something more valuable. We had each other, and in the end, that made all the difference.